Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I am sitting in the backyard of my Portland, Oregon permaculture garden in Zone 8B. Today I want to talk about a really thrilling subject, but it's a subject that's really pertinent this time of year. We are into August, and so let's talk about deadheading. When to deadhead, when not to deadhead, pros and cons. Something that I go back and forth on a lot in my garden, and I feel like my attitude toward deadheading changes from year to year, season to season, plant to plant. My approach is always shifting. So if you have things in your garden that you have strong opinions about whether you should or shouldn't deadhead them, that's totally okay. There's no wrong or right way to do it, but these are the ways that I approach deadheading in my garden, at least this year. So first off, let me say really quickly, I have not been smoking weed or something. I feel like I've always got some kind of something to clarify. A couple weeks ago, I had burnt my lip on hot sugar. And then right now I have ocular rosacea, which is an autoimmune disease, and it's flaring really badly and it attacks my eyes and eyelids. So if my eyes are really red and a little puffy, that's why. But I'm totally down for making a video, and I've been working in the garden. It doesn't stop me from doing that. So deadheading, for those of you that don't know, let's just do a quick definition. It is when you come by and remove the dead flower heads and or immature seeds off of flowers in your garden. There's lots of reasons to do it or not do it. Traditionally, in a very formal garden, dead flower heads are considered withered, unattractive. And so you remove them purely for aesthetic reasons. For me as a permaculturist, and maybe somewhat as I get older, I'm 44 now, I appreciate much more the waning aspect of the garden, right? I'm in the second half of my life. And maybe not, maybe I'll live to be 100, but statistically second half of my life. And I think about the garden really differently. And I value and appreciate when things in the garden are showing the second half of their life. And I still find beauty in that. So for me, one of the reasons that I don't deadhead certain plants in the garden is because the whole cycle of that plant's life has some value for me, the gardener, and some visual appeal and something that it helps me think about. So if we're just talking on a purely conceptual and aesthetic level, there is some beauty and some meaning in leaving flowers when they are withered and watching as they become seed pods, seed heads, and watch the process of the seeds maturing and the senescence of the plant itself. So let's talk about reasons that are not quite so philosophical. One important reason to deadhead your plants is that for a lot of plants, it can stimulate a second round of blooming or even a third round of blooming. Classic example is lavender. After a first bloom, I shear it back. I don't just pinch off the deadheads, I shear it back quite a bit. And most of that is because I'm harvesting the lavender, and then I'll get a second flush of lavender blossoms in early September. Other plants that like to repeat bloom, there's a lot of geraniums that'll repeat bloom. Some of your roses will repeat bloom. Rambling roses will not. They are once bloomers for the most part. And there are some geraniums, hardy geraniums, that will only bloom once. And there's really no reason to deadhead if you are only looking to stimulate a second round of flowering. So understanding the flowering habit of your plants and understanding whether deadheading can prompt your plant to go ahead and bloom again is a really important thing to understand. The third reason to deadhead, besides the traditional view of it being really attractive and to potentially stimulate a second round of blooming, is because it can prevent vigorous self-seeding of a plant around your garden. If you remove the dead pollinated flower before the seeds have a chance to mature, you prevent the distribution of those seeds around your garden by birds or wind or mechanical distribution from pets and people, right? Important, if you want to enjoy a plant and you don't want it to spread, deadheading is a way to prevent the production of seeds and keep your plant contained and not having its babies all over the garden. Great example of this is motherwort, which is an herb that I really love. It has lots of pollinator food potential in August and September. It's a great late food. It's very tall, it moves in the breeze. The flowers are small, but lovely, delicate. I grow it mostly for the pollinator potential. it self-sows like crazy. I have sometimes hundreds of motherwort volunteers if I don't remove those flowers when they are done flowering before the seeds are set. So what are the reasons to not deadhead? Kind of the light is a little weird here, guys. So what are the reasons to not deadhead in your garden? Number one reason to deadhead was traditional value of attractiveness. Well, that's also a reason to not deadhead. As I said before, I appreciate the whole life cycle of the plant, and therefore for me there's a lot of visual interest in the withering flower, the dropping petals, the green seeds, and watching the seeds harden and mature. However, you may not be quite so philosophical and hippie as me, but there are a number of plants that have really structural seed pods and are grown as much for the visual interest in traditional gardens of their seed pods as the flowers. One of the prime examples I can think of is Nigella, called Love in a Mist. I find the seed pods absolutely stunning, and I really, really enjoy having them in the garden all the way through. Now, the problem I mentioned earlier of vigorous self-sowing, I have Nigella coming up everywhere. I don't mind it. It pulls up freely, and I use the volunteers as mulch around the garden. Some other examples of traditional garden plants that are allowed to keep their seed heads and you don't deadhead would be Asiatic poppies, right? Beautiful structural form of the seed head, tremendous visual appeal all the way into winter. Columbine is another one. Really interesting seed heads that are left on the plant long after it is done flowering. If you deadhead, you remove the potential to enjoy the architectural quality of the seed heads in your garden. And you may just have like plain green or brown or nothing going on. If you're thinking about a late autumn garden or even a winter garden, growing those kinds of plants where the seed heads are really interesting, intentionally not deadheading them, letting them go all the way to the end and enjoying the look of those seed pods in late autumn and through the winter is a really valid way to design your garden. So a reason to deadhead is to prevent the formation of seed pods and reduce self-sowing, but maybe you have a plant where you want to encourage self-sowing in your garden. There's a little birdie pipping. A bunch of little birdies. Okay. So a reason to deadhead is to prevent the production of seeds and reduce self-sowing and volunteers in your garden. But maybe you're like me and you love calendula and you want it to self-sow wherever it can. You are going to choose not to deadhead. I personally think that the seed pods of calendula are like a little bit creepy looking. They have a little bit of like Cthulhu vibes, I guess. Don't love the way that they look, but I let them self-sow around the garden. And same thing for some of my other garden flowers in my annual veggie beds. I let them freely self-sow. If I were to go and diligently deadhead, I would not get that kind of seed production and that kind of lazy gardening of letting them plant themselves where they're happiest. Along those lines, seed saving is a really good reason to not deadhead. So you have a spent flower, you know it's been pollinated. Perhaps you want to bag it with a paper bag and let the seeds mature and fall into the paper bag and catch them for seed saving to share with friends, to propagate elsewhere in your garden, etc., etc. Another reason to not deadhead is that the seeds themselves can be a harvest. Classic example of this is coriander. You enjoy cilantro for the leaves. The coriander blooms and you think like, oh no, that's the end of my cilantro crop. No, the seed heads are their own spice unto themselves. And so you want to go ahead and let your cilantro bloom and then let the seeds mature and get another harvest of coriander. Other examples would be things like amaranth. Another classic example is rose hips, right? Especially if you're growing like dog roses or rosa rugosa, you get these huge hips. And not only do they have the visual appeal we mentioned earlier, they're high in vitamin C and they are a crop unto themselves. So especially if you're growing roses that you know are not repeat bloomers, go ahead and let them continue to produce. Don't deadhead. Let those spent flowers turn into rose hips and harvest the fruit. You get, in permaculture, we say stacking functions, right? So you get the yield of the beauty of the flowers, the pollinator power of the flowers, bringing and providing all that food for pollinators. And then you get the yield of the fruit and or seeds at the end. Another good example is chia seeds. So that is also something where your end goal is to not deadhead the flowers, because in early to late autumn, depending where you live, you can get a harvest of those chia seeds. The last reason not to deadhead, and I have kind of sprinkled this throughout the video, is that it provides food for wildlife. Our flowers provide food for wildlife. Our seeds can as well. If we are having a permaculture garden or any garden that is conscious about caring for wildlife, growing those native plants that are adapted and that our urban wildlife, or if you live in the country, rural wildlife, are evolved to eat and consume, and letting them complete their life cycle and produce those fat and protein rich stores of seeds at the end of the season, can help all of your wildlife overwinter. Thinking a lot about birds and how much they love thistles and echinacea. So many of our songbirds really rely on those seed heads in winter, and they're a really important food source to provide that fat and protein that the birds need. So allowing those plants to complete their life cycle, you may be sacrificing repeat blooms, you may be sacrificing a little bit of visual appeal in your garden, but knowing that you are investing in the wildlife in your garden and you are providing for them, that is really good earth care and really good fair share, those two permaculture ethics. And so for me, I feel like it's really worth it to let some things go to seed that I might otherwise deadhead. Also along those lines, I let things go to seed and I intentionally choose not to harvest them when I might otherwise, knowing that those seeds might be better off serving the nutritional needs of the wildlife in my garden rather than increasing my seed bank in my basement. Or I might sacrifice propagating quite so many plants in the spring so that I can leave a patch here of echinacea for birds in the winter, for example. So I hope that helped answer the question of when to deadhead, when not to deadhead, what to deadhead. Again, no right or wrong. It's what works for you and your garden ecosystem and how much time and energy you have. Have you got the energy to go out every single day and deadhead daylilies, because daylilies last one day and that means you have to deadhead them daily? If you have the energy for that and you enjoy that process, go for it. That's great. If you don't, it's okay. It's okay to be like, oh, this plant got away from me. It's gone to seed. The flowers are really faded and wilted and they're converting into seed pods. That's totally okay too. Hope if that happens for you and you didn't intend it to happen, that you can find the beauty in those latter stages of a plant's life as we move into the end of summer and toward fall and winter. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I'll be back really soon for my permaculture garden here in Portland, Oregon. Thank you.